The American Mafia 8, 9, 10, commonly referred to in North America as the Italian American Mafia, the Mafia, or the Mob 8, 9, 10 is a highly organized Italian American crime-related society and organized crime-related group. In North America, the organization is often colloquially referred to as the Italian Mafia or Italian Mob, though these terms may also apply to the separate yet related Sicilian Mafia or other organized crime groups in Italy, or ethnic Italian crime groups in other countries. The organization is often referred to by its members as Cosa Nostra, Italian pronunciation, Cosa Nostra, ʻkɔːza, our thing or this thing of ours, and by the American government as La Cosa Nostra, LCN. The organization's name is derived from the original Mafia or Cosa Nostra, the Sicilian Mafia, with American Mafia originally referring simply to mafia groups from Sicily operating in the United States. The Mafia in the United States emerged in impoverished Italian immigrant neighborhoods in New York's East Harlem, or Italian Harlem, the Lower East Side, and Brooklyn, also emerging in other areas of the northeastern United States and several other major metropolitan areas, such as New Orleans and Chicago, during the late 19th century and early 20th century, following waves of Italian immigration especially from Sicily and other regions of southern Italy. Campanian, Calabrian and other Italian criminal groups in the United States, as well as independent Italian American criminals, eventually merged with Sicilian mafiosi to create the modern Pan-Italian Mafia in North America. Today, the Italian American Mafia cooperates in various criminal activities with Italian organized crime groups, such as the Sicilian Mafia, the Camorra of Campania and the 'Ndrangheta of Calabria. The most important unit of the American Mafia is that of a family, as the various criminal organizations that make up the Mafia are known. Despite the name of family to describe the various units, they are not familial groupings. The Mafia is currently most active in the northeastern United States, with the heaviest activity in New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, New Jersey, Pittsburgh, Buffalo, and New England, in areas such as Boston, Providence, and Hartford. It also remains heavily active in Chicago and has a significant and powerful presence in other Midwestern metropolitan areas such as Kansas City, Detroit, Milwaukee, Cleveland, and St. Louis. Outside of these areas, the Mafia is also very active in Florida, Phoenix, Las Vegas, and Los Angeles. Mafia families have previously existed to a greater extent and continue to exist to a lesser extent in northeastern Pennsylvania, Dallas, Denver, New Orleans, Rochester, San Francisco, San Jose, Seattle, and Tampa. While some of the regional crime families in these areas may no longer exist to the same extent as before, descendants have continued to engage in criminal operations, while consolidation has occurred in other areas, with rackets being controlled by more powerful crime families from nearby cities. At the Mafia's peak, there were at least 26 cities around the United States with Cosa Nostra families, with many more offshoots and associates in other cities. There are 5 main New York City Mafia families, known as the Five Families: the Gambino, Lucchese, Genovese, Bonanno, and Colombo families. The Italian American Mafia has long dominated organized crime in the United States. Each crime family has its own territory and operates independently, while nationwide coordination is overseen by the Commission, which consists of the bosses of each of the strongest families. Though the majority of the Mafia's activities are contained to the northeastern United States and Chicago, they continue to dominate organized crime in the United States, despite the increasing numbers of other crime groups. Terminology. Further information: Sicilian Mafia etymology. The word mafia, Italian, mafia, derives from the Sicilian adjective mafioso, which, roughly translated, means swagger, but can also be translated as boldness or bravado. In reference to a man, mafioso, mafioso in Italian, in 19th century Sicily signified fearless, enterprising, and proud, according to scholar Diego Gambetta 16. In reference to a woman, however, the feminine form adjective mafiosa means beautiful or attractive. In North America, the Italian American Mafia may be colloquially referred to as simply the Mafia or the Mob. However, without context, these two terms may cause confusion, the mafia may also refer to the Sicilian Mafia specifically or Italian organized crime in general, while the mob can refer to other similar organized crime groups, such as the Irish mob, or organized crime in general. History. Origins: the Black Hand. Main article: Black Hand, Extortion. Paolo Antonio Vaccarelli, also known as Paul Kelly, founder of the 5 Points Gang. The first published account of what became the Mafia in the United States dates to the spring of 1869. The New Orleans Times reported that the city's 2nd District had become overrun by well-known and notorious Sicilian murderers, counterfeiters, and burglars, who, in the last month, have formed a sort of general CO partnership or stock company for the plunder and disturbance of the city. Citation needed emigration from southern Italy to the Americas was primarily to Brazil and Argentina, and New Orleans had a heavy volume of port traffic to and from both locales. Mafia groups in the United States first became influential in the New York metropolitan area, gradually progressing from small neighborhood operations in poor Italian ghettos to citywide and eventually national organizations. The Black Hand was a name given to an extortion method used in Italian neighborhoods at the turn of the 20th century. It has been sometimes mistaken for the Mafia itself, which it is not. The Black Hand was a criminal society, but there were many small Black Hand gangs. Black Hand extortion was often, wrongly, viewed as the activity of a single organization, because Black Hand criminals in Italian communities throughout the United States used the same methods of extortion. Giuseppe Esposito was the first known Mafia member to emigrate to the United States. He and 6 other Sicilians fled to New York after murdering 11 wealthy landowners, the chancellor, and a vice-chancellor of a Sicilian province. He was arrested in New Orleans in 1881 and extradited to Italy. From the 1890s to 1920 in New York City, the 5 Points Gang, founded by Paul Kelly, were very powerful in the Little Italy of the Lower East Side. Kelly recruited some street hoodlums who later became some of the most famous crime bosses of the century, such as Johnny Torrio, Al Capone, Lucky Luciano, and Frankie Yale. They were often in conflict with the Jewish Eastmans of the same area. There was also an influential Mafia family in East Harlem. The Neapolitan Camorra was very active in Brooklyn. In Chicago, the 19th Ward was an Italian neighborhood that became known as the Bloody 19th due to the frequent violence in the ward, mostly as a result of Mafia activity, feuds, and vendettas. New Orleans was possibly the site of the first Mafia incident in the United States that received both national and international attention. On October 15, 1890, New Orleans Police Superintendent David Hennessy was murdered execution style. It is still unclear whether Italian immigrants actually killed him, or whether it was a frame-up by nativists against the reviled underclass immigrants. Hundreds of Sicilians were arrested on mostly baseless charges, and 19 were eventually indicted for the murder. An acquittal followed, with rumors of bribed and intimidated witnesses. On March 14, 1891, after the acquittal, the outraged citizens of New Orleans organized a lynch mob and proceeded to kill 11 of the 19 defendants. 2 were hanged, 9 were shot, and the remaining 8 escaped. Prohibition era. On January 16, 1919, Prohibition began in the United States with the 18th Amendment to the United States Constitution making it illegal to manufacture, transport, or sell alcohol. Despite these bans, there was still a very high demand for it from the public. This created an atmosphere that tolerated crime as a means to provide liquor to the public, even among the police and city politicians. While not explicitly related to Mafia involvement, the murder rate during the Prohibition era rose over 40% from 6.8 per 100,000 individuals to 9.7, and within the first 3 months preceding the 18th Amendment, $500,000 in bonded whiskey was stolen from government warehouses. The profits that could be made from selling and distributing alcohol were worth the risk of punishment from the government, which had a difficult time enforcing prohibition. There were over 900,000 cases of liquor shipped to the borders of U.S. cities. Criminal gangs and politicians saw the opportunity to make fortunes and began shipping larger quantities of alcohol to U.S. cities. The majority of the alcohol was imported from Canada, the Caribbean, and the American Midwest, where stills manufactured illegal alcohol. Al Capone's culturally publicized violent rise to power in Chicago made him an everlasting criminal figure of the Prohibition era. In the early 1920s, fascist Benito Mussolini took control of Italy and waves of Italian immigrants fled to the United States. Sicilian Mafia members also fled to the United States, as Mussolini cracked down on mafia activities in Italy. Most Italian immigrants resided in tenement buildings. As a way to escape the poor lifestyle, some Italian immigrants chose to join the American Mafia. The Mafia took advantage of Prohibition and began selling illegal alcohol. The profits from bootlegging far exceeded the traditional crimes of protection, extortion, gambling, and prostitution. Prohibition allowed mafia families to make fortunes. As Prohibition continued, victorious factions went on to dominate organized crime in their respective cities, setting up the family structure of each city. The bootlegging industry organized members of these gangs before they were distinguished as today's known families. The new industry required members at all different employment levels, such as bosses, lawyers, truckers, and even members to eliminate competitors through threat/force. Gangs hijacked each other's alcohol shipments, forcing rivals to pay them for protection to leave their operations alone, and armed guards almost invariably accompanied the caravans that delivered the liquor. In the 1920s, Italian mafia families began waging wars for absolute control over lucrative bootlegging rackets. As the violence erupted, Italians fought Irish and Jewish ethnic gangs for control of bootlegging in their respective territories. In New York City, Frankie Yale waged war with the Irish American White Hand Gang. In Chicago, Al Capone and his family massacred the North Side Gang, another Irish American outfit. In New York City, by the end of the 1920s, two factions of organized crime had emerged to fight for control of the criminal underworld, one led by Joe Masseria and the other by Salvatore Maranzano. This caused the Castellamarese War, which led to Masseria's murder in 1931. Maranzano then divided New York City into 5 families. Maranzano, the first leader of the American Mafia, established the code of conduct for the organization, set up the family divisions and structure, and established procedures for resolving disputes. In an unprecedented move, Maranzano set himself up as boss of all bosses and required all families to pay tribute to him. This new role was received negatively, and Maranzano was murdered within 6 months on the orders of Charles Lucky Luciano. Luciano was a former Masseria underling who had switched sides to Maranzano and orchestrated the killing of Masseria. The Commission. Further information: The Commission, American Mafia. FBI chart of American Mafia bosses across the country in 1963. As an alternative to the previous despotic mafia practice of naming a single mafia boss as capo di tutti capi, or boss of all bosses, Luciano created the Commission in 1931, where the bosses of the most powerful families would have equal say and vote on important matters and solve disputes between families. This group ruled over the national crime syndicate and brought in an era of peace and prosperity for the American Mafia. By mid-century, there were 26 official commission-sanctioned mafia crime families, each based in a different city, except for the 5 families which were all based in New York. 33 Each family operated independently from the others and generally had exclusive territory it controlled. As opposed to the older generation of mustache Petes such as Maranzano and Masseria, who usually worked only with fellow Italians, the Young Turks led by Luciano were more open to working with other groups, most notably the Jewish American criminal syndicates, to achieve greater profits. The Mafia thrived by following a strict set of rules that originated in Sicily that called for an organized hierarchical structure and a code of silence that forbade its members from cooperating with the police, omerta. Failure to follow any of these rules was punishable by death. The rise of power that the Mafia acquired during Prohibition would continue long after alcohol was made legal again. Criminal empires which had expanded on bootleg money would find other avenues to continue making large sums of money. When alcohol ceased to be prohibited in 1933, the Mafia diversified its money-making criminal activities to include both old and new illegal gambling operations, loan sharking, extortion, protection rackets, drug trafficking, fencing, and labor racketeering through control of labor unions. In the mid-20th century, the Mafia was reputed to have infiltrated many labor unions in the United States, most notably the Teamsters and International Longshoremen's Association. This allowed crime families to make inroads into very profitable legitimate businesses such as construction, demolition, waste management, trucking, and in the waterfront and garment industry. In addition, they could raid the union's health and pension funds, extort businesses with threats of a workers' strike, and participate in bid rigging. In New York City, most construction projects could not be performed without the Five Families' approval. In the port and loading dock industries, the Mafia bribed union members to tip them off to valuable items being brought in. Mobsters would then steal these products and fence the stolen merchandise. Charles Lucky Luciano in 1948. Meyer Lansky made inroads into the casino industry in Cuba during the 1930s while the Mafia was already involved in exporting Cuban sugar and rum. When his friend Fulgencio Batista became president of Cuba in 1952, several Mafia bosses were able to make legitimate investments in legalized casinos. One estimate of the number of casinos mobsters owned was no less than 1936. However, when Batista was overthrown following the Cuban Revolution, his successor Fidel Castro banned U.S. investment in the country, putting an end to the Mafia's presence in Cuba. Las Vegas was seen as an open city where any family can work. Once Nevada legalized gambling, mobsters were quick to take advantage and the casino industry became very popular in Las Vegas. Since the 1940s, Mafia families from New York, Cleveland, Kansas City, Milwaukee, and Chicago had interests in Las Vegas casinos. They got loans from the Teamsters Pension Fund, a union they effectively controlled, and used legitimate front men to build casinos. When money came into the counting room, hired men schemed cash before it was recorded, then delivered it to their respective bosses. This money went unrecorded, but the amount is estimated to be in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Operating in the shadows, the Mafia faced little opposition from law enforcement. Local law enforcement agencies did not have the resources or knowledge to effectively combat organized crime committed by a secret society they were unaware existed. 35 Many people within police forces and courts were simply bribed, while witness intimidation was also common. 35 In 1951, a U.S. Senate committee called the Kefauver hearings determined that a sinister criminal organization known as the Mafia operated in the nation. Many suspected mobsters were subpoenaed for questioning, but few testified and none gave any meaningful information. In 1957, New York State Police uncovered a meeting and arrested major figures from around the country in Appalachian, New York. The event, dubbed the Appalachian Meeting, forced the FBI to recognize organized crime as a serious problem in the United States and changed the way law enforcement investigated it. In 1963, Joe Valicki became the first Mafia member to turn state's evidence, and provided detailed information of its inner workings and secrets. More importantly, he revealed the Mafia's existence to the law, which enabled the Federal Bureau of Investigation to begin an aggressive assault on the Mafia's National Crime Syndicate. 38 Following Valicki's testimony, the Mafia could no longer operate completely in the shadows. The FBI put a lot more effort and resources into organized crime activities nationwide and created the Organized Crime Strike Force in various cities. While all this created more pressure on the Mafia, it did little, however, to curb its criminal activities. Progress was made by the beginning of the 1980s, when the FBI was able to rid Las Vegas casinos of Mafia control and made a determined effort to loosen the Mafia's stronghold on labor unions. The Mafia's involvement in the U.S. economy. Carlo Gambino, head of the Gambino crime family. By the late 1970s, the Mafia were involved in many industries, including betting on college sports. Several Mafia members associated with the Lucchese crime family participated in a point-shaving scandal involving the Boston College basketball team. Rick Kuhn, Henry Hill, and others associated with the Lucchese crime family manipulated the results of the games during the 1978-1979 basketball season. Through bribing and intimidating several members of the team, they ensured their bets on the point spread of each game would go in their favor. One of the most lucrative gains for the Mafia was through gas tax fraud. They created schemes to keep the money that they owed in taxes after the sale of millions of dollars worth of wholesale petroleum. This allowed them to sell more gasoline at even lower prices. Michael Franzese, also known as the Yuppie Don, ran and organized a gas scandal and stole over $290 million in gasoline taxes by evading the Internal Revenue Service, IRS, and shutting down the gas station before government officials could make him pay what he owed. Franzese was caught in 1985. Labor racketeering helped the Mafia control many industries from a macroeconomic scale. This tactic helped them grow in power and influence in many cities with big labor unions such as New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, Detroit, and many others. Many members of the Mafia were enlisted in unions and even became union executives. The Mafia has controlled unions all over the U.S. to extort money and resources out of big business, with recent indictments of corruption involving the New Jersey Waterfront Union, the Concrete Workers Union, and the Teamster Union. Restaurants were yet another powerful means by which the Mafia could gain economic power. A large concentration of Mafia-owned restaurants was in New York City. Not only were they the setting of many killings and important meetings, but they were also an effective means of smuggling drugs and other illegal goods. From 1985 to 1987, Sicilian mafiosi in the U.S. imported an estimated $1.65 billion worth of heroin through pizzerias, hiding the cargo in various food products. Another one of the areas of the economy that the Mafia was most influential was Las Vegas, Nevada, beginning just after World War II with the opening of the first gambling resort, the Flamingo. Many credit the Mafia with being a big part of the city's development in the mid-20th century, as millions of dollars in capital flowing into new casino resorts laid the foundation for further economic growth. This capital did not come from one Mafia family alone, but many throughout the country seeking to gain even more power and wealth. Large profits from casinos, run as legitimate businesses, would help to finance many of the illegal activities of the Mafia from the 1950s into the 1980s. In the 1950s, more Mafia-financed casinos were constructed, such as the Stardust, Sahara, Tropicana, Desert Inn, and Riviera. Tourism in the city greatly increased through the 1960s and strengthened the local economy. The 1960s were also when the Mafia's influence in the Las Vegas economy began to dwindle. However, the Nevada state government and federal government had been working to weaken Mafia activity on the Strip. In 1969, the Nevada state legislature passed a law that made it easier for corporations to own casinos. This brought new investors to the local economy to buy casinos from the Mafia. The U.S. Congress passed the RICO Act a year later. This law gave more authority to law enforcement to pursue the Mafia for its illegal activities. There was a sharp decline in mob involvement in Las Vegas in the 1980s. Through the RICO law, many in the Mafia were convicted and imprisoned. The RICO Act. Sammy Gravano. When the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, RICO Act, became federal law in 1970, it became a highly effective tool in prosecuting mobsters. It provides for extended criminal penalties for acts performed as part of an ongoing criminal organization. Violation of the act is punishable by up to 20 years in prison per count, up to $25,000 in fines, and the violator must forfeit all properties attained while violating the RICO Act. The RICO Act has proven to be a very powerful weapon because it attacks the entire corrupt entity instead of individuals who can easily be replaced with other organized crime members. Between 1981 and 1992, 23 bosses from around the country were convicted under the law, while between 1981 and 1988, 13 underbosses and 43 captains were convicted. Over 1,000 crime family figures were convicted by 1990-48. While this significantly crippled many Mafia families around the country, the most powerful families continued to dominate crime in their territories, even if the new laws put more mobsters in jail and made it harder to operate. John Gotti just after his arrest in 1990. A high-profile RICO case sentenced John Gotti and Frank Locascio to life in prison in 1992-49 with the help of informant Sammy Gravano in exchange for immunity from prosecution for his crimes. Aside from avoiding long prison stretches, the FBI could put mobsters in the United States Federal Witness Protection Program, changing their identities and supporting them financially for life. This led to dozens of mobsters testifying and providing information during the 1990s, which led to the imprisonment of hundreds of other members. As a result, the Mafia has seen a major decline in its power and influence in organized crime since the 1990s. On January 9, 2003, Bonanno crime family boss Joseph Massino was arrested and indicted, alongside Salvatore Vitale, Frank Lino, and Capo Daniel Mangelli, in a comprehensive racketeering indictment. The charges against Massino himself included ordering the 1981 murder of Dominic Sonny Black Napolitano. Massino's trial began on May 24, 2004, with Judge Nicholas Garaufis presiding and Greg D. Andres and Robert Haynock heading the prosecution. 53 He now faced 11 RICO counts for 7 murders, due to the prospect of prosecutors seeking the death penalty for the Sciascia murder. That case was severed to be tried separately: arson, extortion, loan sharking, illegal gambling, and money laundering. 54 After deliberating for 5 days, the jury found Massino guilty of all 11 counts on July 30, 2004. His sentencing was initially scheduled for October 12, and he was expected to receive a sentence of life imprisonment with no possibility of parole. 55 The jury also approved the prosecutor's recommended $10 million forfeiture of the proceeds of his reign as Bonanno boss on the day of the verdict. Immediately after his July 30 conviction, as court was adjourned, Massino requested a meeting with Judge Garaufis, where he made his first offer to cooperate. He did so in hopes of sparing his life. He was facing the death penalty if found guilty of Sciascia's murder, as one of John Ashcroft's final acts as Attorney General was to order federal prosecutors to seek the death penalty for Massino. Massino thus stood to be the first Mafia boss to be executed for his crimes, and the first mob boss to face the death penalty since Lepka Buchalter was executed in 1944. Massino was the first sitting boss of a New York crime family to turn state's evidence, and the second in the history of the American Mafia to do so. 60. Philadelphia crime family boss Ralph Natali had flipped in 1999 when facing drug charges, though Natali was mostly a front boss while the real boss of the Philadelphia Mafia used Natali as a diversion for authorities. In the 21st century, the Mafia has continued to be involved in a broad spectrum of illegal activities. These include murder, extortion, corruption of public officials, gambling, infiltration of legitimate businesses, labor racketeering, loan sharking, tax fraud schemes and stock manipulation schemes. Although the Mafia used to be nationwide, today most of its activities are confined to the Northeast and Chicago. While other criminal organizations such as the Russian Mafia, Chinese triads, Mexican drug cartels and others have all grabbed a share of criminal activities, the Mafia continues to be the dominant criminal organization in these regions, partly due to its strict hierarchical structure. Law enforcement is concerned with the possible resurgence of the Mafia as it regroups from the turmoil of the 1990s, although FBI and local law enforcement agencies now focus more on homeland security and less on organized crime since the September 11 attacks. To avoid FBI attention and prosecution, the modern Mafia also outsources much of its work to other criminal groups, such as motorcycle gangs. Structure. The American Mafia operates on a strict hierarchical structure. While similar to its Sicilian origins, the American Mafia's modern organizational structure was created by Salvatore Maranzano in 1931. He created the 5 families, each of which would have a boss, underboss, capos, soldiers, all only of full-blooded Italian origin, while associates could come from any background. All inducted members of the Mafia are called made men. This signifies that they are untouchable in the criminal underworld and any harm brought to them will be met with retaliation. With the exception of associates, all mobsters within the Mafia are made official members of a crime family. The 3 highest positions make up the administration. Below the administration, there are factions each headed by a capo regime, captain, who leads a crew of soldiers and associates. They report to the administration and can be seen as equivalent to managers in a business. When a boss makes a decision, he rarely issues orders directly to workers who would carry it out but instead passes instructions down through the chain of command. This way, the higher levels of the organization are insulated from law enforcement attention if the lower level members who actually commit the crime should be captured or investigated, providing plausible deniability. There are occasionally other positions in the family leadership. Frequently, ruling panels have been set up when a boss goes to jail to divide the responsibility of the family. These usually consist of 3 or 5 members. This also helps divert police attention from any one member. The family messenger and street boss were positions created by former Genovese family leader Vincent Giganti. The boss is the head of the family, usually reigning as a dictator, sometimes called the Don or Godfather. The boss receives a cut of every operation. Operations are taken on by every member of the family and of the regions occupying family 68. Depending on the family, the boss may be chosen by a vote from the capo regimes of the family. In the event of a tie, the underboss must vote. In the past, all the members of a family voted on the boss, but by the late 1950s, any gathering such as that usually attracted too much attention. In practice, many of these elections are seen as having an inevitable result, such as that of John Gotti in 1986. According to Sammy Gravano, a meeting was held in a basement during which all capos were searched and Gotti's men stood ominously behind them. Gotti was then proclaimed boss. Underboss. The underboss, usually appointed by the boss, is the second in command of the family. The underboss often runs the day-to-day responsibilities of the family or oversees its most lucrative rackets. He usually gets a percentage of the family's income from the boss's cut. The underboss is usually. If you like this video, please like, comment about your thoughts on this, subscribe and click the bell icon for further notifications.